Okay, so I sucked the beginning into this, so maybe you might be interested in how we got to that point. That's what we're going to talk about. I don't even know what it is yet. However, what we're going to do is emulate something, a specific template we're going to be forced to use. This is good practice to do, and we're going to try to achieve a certain mood. In this case, I already know we're going to try to achieve a slightly Eastern exotic flavor with a set template. Knowing the sound you're looking for and how to achieve it is half the battle. You could take set templates like this and actually achieve that still. So I physically have inputted this into notation, and it's just in D flat, and there's just two chords, 1 and 4, that Rimsky does here. And the things in D flat. The thing I want to take notice of is, like the melodies in the violins, 1 and 2, unison. And notation samples aren't that great. So violas are split, doing a line like this. A little bit of a contrapuntal movement with passing tones and whatnot. And the cellos are doing this kind of walking line. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. The basses are split. One's doing a sustain, while the other split group's just doing a pizzicato. If you didn't know you can do this, now you do. Especially if you just use samples. I'm just going to hit playback on the notation program here real quick. The one thing I want to point out is that using notation sounds and also samples in general are emulations. And in truth, sometimes film scores are too, because they're so overly produced and heavily layered like a rock band a lot of the time. So it's not really realistic. So let's go ahead and get to the topic. Let's scrap all that part. Describe the scene with the same setup. So I'm going to choose D harmonic major. It's got that augmented second skip. Or you could think of that as... well, we're going to choose two chords from it. There's harmonic minor. And you could also think of this as also just borrowing from harmonic minor, if that's the way you want to think. The fully diminished 7th chord over a pedal point. D major, then a C sharp fully diminished. So whether you consider it borrowed or harmonic major, that's up to you. But I'm just going to exploit this flat 6 and the augmented second interval to the C sharp from the B flat. So pulling my setup up here, I put these guys in separate staves. I put these guys in separate staves, this divisions in separate staves, because I simply just don't like to switch in between different voices all the time. And also if they're on one stave between a piz and a sustain, notation will play it back wrong. So I'm going to choose 6/8 to have that sort of sway feel. I've already planned that part out. There's actually a scene that I'm going to do this to, and I'll show you it in the beginning. Well, it played back in the beginning. I just don't know what's going to happen yet. So I'll just go ahead and start with the harmony. The harmony was sustained in the horns, so we're going to go ahead and do that. We're just going to have a D major chord. We're limited to 3 horns here, so like I said, D harmonic major. Or when we have the fully diminished sound on the 7th degree, you could consider that borrowed as well. That part is completely subjective because we're only doing 2 chords here. So I'm creating my D chord here. Okay, so I'm not going to waste a lot of time putting in rests and stuff because I consider this practice. We're not trying to create a masterpiece here. So remember, horn 3 goes in between 1 and 2. So I could stay on the D there and just sustain it. And I'm intentionally doing a lot more notational stuff because I've been getting a lot of emails about keyboard lessons, and I'm not a keyboard player. So I teach composition and orchestration. Keyboard's just a tool. So the next chord has to represent the diminished chord, which will follow the major chord again. So the fully diminished 7th chord, 7 chord, to the 1 chord again. If you consider it harmonic major or borrowed, either way, it doesn't matter. And speaking of which, there's no such thing as one scale fits everything. You could just as easily use Phrygian dominant for something exotic. So I'm going to go ahead and choose the B flat here. Remember, C sharp fully diminished 7th is spelled C sharp, E, G, B flat. And it's important that you represent the chord you're trying to imply by spelling it correctly, because you don't want to confuse people on the intended chord. If it's spelled enharmonically different, it might confuse people. That's one reason you'd always want to spell the chord correctly. Like if you're spelling an A chord, you don't want to do A, D flat, E. So I'm going to go ahead and stick in the horn 3 on the E. Speaking of which, this is not in transposed mode right now. I'm doing it in concert pitch for most people because most people can't read transposing instruments. However, this is in a lesson on transposing instruments. Playing it back, just a very soft D chord, implied fully diminished seventh. Since we only have 3 horns, we could only do implied back to the D. But we will expose that C sharp somewhere else. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to get the melody going here. We'll just kind of write. Remember, you're just practicing. So take something with a set template and just practice writing with a mood in mind. So we're going to create kind of like an exotic little harmonic melody here. Actually, I'm going to change that G to a... thinking for a second to see what I can kind of hear in my head. So I'm actually changed that G to an F sharp. Okay, now we'll just continue with the melody. D, maybe an F sharp. Okay, now we'll go to that G and produce on the diminished chord. I think I'll just keep it similar scheme as bar 1. Actually, with a little bit of variation, especially on this over this diminished chord. Let's expose that augmented second interval. So let's go ahead and do something like the flat 6. This will help give it that exotic sound when you're intentionally exposing that augmented second interval. And after this, we'll give our little melody a little rest here. Just sustaining an A note. Remember, we're not trying to do a masterpiece. We're doing the first thing that comes to mind. So that exposing that augmented second interval between B flat and C sharp is what makes things sound slightly exotic sometimes, is when you expose that. Now this will start sounding a little better once we start filling it out. I'm just creating a little, what I always like to refer to as melodic shaping. Just throw an accent here, especially on that C sharp to really expose it. Now I'll just copy that to violins too, because that's what Rimsky's example had. Remember, we're forced to use the same exact setup as him. The same template. His was also muted, so... So we're getting there, we're close. What I'm going to do is just quickly throw in the basses, because we're just going to do exactly what Rimsky did. One sustaining, one piz. And again, while I'm doing this, it's on a pedal point as well. While I'm doing this, the reason I split these up into different groups like this is because the notation will not play it back. If you have one voice doing sustain, one doing piz, it will not play it back correctly, at least on Notion. I do have Dorico, but I'm still learning it. So the split group has one doing pizzicato every once in a while, one doing just a constant pedal point sustain. So truthfully, you're also teaching yourself tricks by doing this. I know this book inside and out though, because I've worked with it so many times with students, but you are teaching yourself little tricks by doing stuff like this. However, if you want to be like a media or film composer, it's kind of iffy whether you actually really want to learn how to orchestrate, because people will actually do that for you. And I'm definitely not saying that to discourage people. Most film guys do have orchestrators. That's just a fact nowadays. So let's work on a kind of a walking cello line. We don't have to do exactly like he did. We could arpeggiate like this. Now let's go to the flat 6, typical film score thing to do. But it also is going to contribute to the exoticness that we're trying to achieve with this limited palette of sounds that we can only use. So, okay, that'll happen twice, and on the diminished chord, I'm going to kind of outline the diminished chord. So I'm just going to actually all we're going to do is outline the diminished chord shape. Let's go ahead and start, because you kind of hear a little line going here. B flat is part of C sharp diminished, fully diminished 7th on the C sharp. Now here's something, I'm not going to resolve that leading tone. Okay, that's an old rule. You don't have to obey that all the time. And then just going to repeat bar 1. Very common kind of line in film score music is that. Flat 6 arpeggiated with a major chord. In fact, I'd venture to say flat 6 based arpeggios on major and minor chords are extremely common in like sci-fi and fantasy kind of genres. But this is meant to sound exotic, but it's still using that same kind of move. So just setting up our little slur scheme here. We'll just make it pretty even like this. And if you're a sample user, it basically means use your legato patch. Again, I'm not overly worried about resolving that leading tone. So let's go ahead and finish this off with the violas, because this isn't a part writing exercise. So the violas had to split groups too, and one was kind of doing a little bit more sustaining, while the other one was doing a little bit more of a voice independence. So let's just go ahead and do a similar scheme, but let's go ahead and stick this on the root. You should be able to hear the root if you can, and then the leading tone, you should be able to hear that. Back to the root. So that one does resolve. Oops. Yeah, I gotta fix that. Okay, there we go. So this exercise is basically taking about as long as this video is. And in truth, I would actually encourage taking the same exact setup and creating a completely different mood. Taking the same template and creating a totally different mood is no different than taking the same couple of chords and creating a totally different mood. And actually, I probably have about 15 variations on this exact setup because I teach out of this book all the time. And I did write in there divided, and just so people understand that the groups are split. So I'm going to create a little second line. And remember, this one had a little bit of walking, so let's do a little walking. There's really not much else going on non-harmonically. So let's have something, a little bit of non-harmonic aspects going on here. Aside from the melody, so. Because the cello is basically outlining a flat 6 kind of arpeggio, and then a fully diminished 7th arpeggio. So this one will kind of have like the counter lines. And I'm just going to do this very quickly. Let me see. I'll go ahead and set up a little scheme here. I call it shaping the melody or whatever. Even though that's well, you can consider a secondary line a melody if you want. So this makes things just sound kind of independent because the cellos are basically arpeggiating a flat 6 chord and a diminished 7th chord. So there's a couple of passing tones in there. And if you ever did like the old school kind of passing tones things, they usually have to be consonant with other passing tones. I prefer them not to be sometimes. So, because sometimes a little dissonance in between two notes is actually a very, very effective tool. I would say more than consonance is. So let me complete this, and I messed up because I was talking too much. And okay, we'll just almost wrap it up here. Just sticking in a few more things, and I'll have the thing just automatically fill in rests where I forgot, because we're sketching. Remember, you're just sketching, doesn't matter. We're not turning in any homework, so just leave as is if you want, if you just want to sketch something out and then save it for later, or export it to your DAW, which I'm going to do in a second. So we took a limited template exactly like RK's and created a mood with it. Now I'm going to export that out to the DAW and then play back what plays in the beginning of this. So now again, you might want to take the same exact template and create a totally different feel. And I may even do that in another video, take the same exact thing. Because the more you practice trying to get a mood or a specific sound, the better you get at just creating that sound very quickly without having to guess. And also, it's just generally a really good creation practice is just to keep using the same thing or a limited template like this and create something with it with a specific goal. And our goal was to create something slightly exotic to fit that scene with a limited template.